The refugee ship Star Whisper drifted through the cold darkness of space like a wounded animal looking for shelter. Inside its metal walls, 12,000 Villani families huddled together in fear. Their blue skin had turned pale with worry, and their large eyes searched the faces around them for hope that was hard to find. Captain Zexhai stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the scanner screens with growing dread. The green dots that showed his escort ships had vanished one by one over the past hour. Now only red dots remained on the display, moving closer like hungry predators. The Korthak Empire had found them. "Captain, the last escort ship just went. Silent," reported his communications officer. Her voice shook as she spoke. "The enemy fleet is closing in. We have maybe 20 minutes before they reach us." Zexhai closed his eyes and felt the weight of 12,000 lives pressing down on his shoulders. The Korthak were known throughout the galaxy as slavers and killers. They would take the strong ones to work in their mines and factories. The Wanda, weak, would simply disappear. Children would grow up knowing only chains and fear. "Sir, our engines are failing," called out the chief engineer from across the bridge. "The hyperspace drive took too much damage when we escaped our homeworld. We cannot jump to safety." The captain looked at his crew and saw his own despair reflected in their faces. They had run so far from the war that destroyed their planet, only to find death waiting for them in the empty space between stars. But Zexhai was not ready to give up, not yet. "Open the long-range communication array," he ordered. "Send out a distress call on all frequencies." His communications officer looked confused. "Captain, there are no friendly ships in this sector. The nearest Galactic Council forces are weeks away." "Then we call to anyone who will listen," Zexhai said firmly. "Even if they cannot reach us in time, maybe they can warn others about the Korthak movement through this area." The officer began working at her station, but then she paused. "Sir, there is one system within range of our transmitter, but I do not think we should contact them." "Which system?" Zexhai asked. "Sol system, Captain, the human homeworld." A cold silence filled the bridge. Every member of the crew had heard stories about humans. They came from a world so dangerous that it killed most things that tried to live there. The few species that had met humans described them as violent and unpredictable. Most governments had banned contact with the Deathworld species. "They say humans are monsters," whispered the navigation officer. "They fight wars for sport and eat their enemies." "They say many things," Zexhai replied quietly. "But they also say humans have never kept slaves." He thought about his daughter, somewhere below in the refugee holds with the other children. She was only 6 years old and still believed her father could protect her from anything. Maybe he could not save them all, but he would not let the Korthak take them without a fight. "Send the message to Sol system," he ordered. "Tell them we are refugees under attack. Tell them we have children aboard." The message traveled through space at the speed of light, racing toward the small yellow star that warmed the infamous death world called Earth. It would take several minutes to reach the human listening posts, and even if they answered, help would arrive far too late. On Earth, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison sat at his monitoring station drinking cold coffee and watching the endless stream of data from deep space sensors. It was a quiet night shift, the kind where nothing happened and time seemed to crawl by like a wounded animal. The alert tone made him sit up straight in his chair. A priority message was coming in from the edge of monitored space. Jake quickly routed the signal to his translation computers and waited for the results. The message was simple but desperate. A refugee ship carrying 12,000 civilians was under attack by a hostile fleet. They were requesting immediate assistance from anyone who could help. The transmission included their exact location and the number of enemy ships closing in on them. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he read the details. 12,000 people, including families and children, were about to be captured by slavers. He had read the intelligence reports about the Korthak Empire. He knew what happened to their prisoners. "Sir, you need to see this," Jake called to his supervisor, Colonel Ryan Phillips, who was reviewing reports at another station. Phillips walked over and read the message on Jake's screen. His face grew hard as stone. "How long ago was this sent?" 18 minutes, sir. The Korthak fleet will reach them in less than 10 minutes. Get me Admiral Sullivan on the priority channel, Phillips ordered. Emergency classification. Within 2 minutes, Admiral Kate Sullivan appeared on the main communication screen. She was in her office at Fleet Command, still wearing her dress uniform from some late meeting with government officials. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her blue eyes were sharp and alert despite the late hour. "What do we have, Colonel?" she asked without wasting time on pleasantries. Phillips quickly explained the situation while Jake sent the refugee ship's message to the Admiral's personal display. Sullivan read it twice, her expression growing more serious with each word. "Confirmed. Enemy strength?" she asked. 12 heavy cruisers, Admiral. Standard Korthak hunting pack formation." Sullivan was quiet for several seconds, thinking through options and possibilities. 12 Korthak cruisers were more than most species could handle. The Galactic Council would need to assemble a fleet from multiple worlds to face such a force. By then, the refugees would be long gone. "Jake," the Admiral said, looking directly at the young officer, "send a message back to that refugee ship. Tell them help is coming." "Ma'am, our nearest ships are 6 hours away," Jake replied carefully. "Even at maximum speed, we cannot reach them in time." Admiral Sullivan smiled, but it was not a kind expression. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted prey. "Son, when someone attacks innocent people and asks us for help, we do not send a rescue mission. We send a hunting party." She turned to Colonel Phillips. "Get me Commodore Dan Carter and the 3rd Assault Fleet. Tell him he has priority clearance for combat operations, and wake up Colonel Lisa Harper. Tell her the Retribution is going active." "Admiral," Phillips said slowly, "the 3rd Fleet only has 8 ships. They will be outnumbered by the Korthak." "Colonel, those are not 8 ships," Sullivan replied. "Those are 8 ships full of very angry humans who just learned that someone is hurting. Children, the Korthak have no idea what they have started." As orders flew through the communication networks and ships began powering up their weapons, Jake sent a simple message back toward the refugee ship. It would arrive too late to help them prepare, but maybe it would give them hope in their darkest hour. The message was short. "Help is coming. Hold on." What Jake did not tell them was that the help coming their way was not a rescue mission. It was 8 ships full of Deathworlders who had just learned that slavers were hunting refugees. The Korthak were about to discover why the galaxy feared humans. War Master Thakmor stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching the refugee ship grow larger on his viewing screen. The Villani vessel was huge but helpless, drifting without power like a wounded beast. 12,000 slaves would bring a good price in the markets of his empire. The Korthak commander was tall and muscular, with dark red skin and sharp teeth that showed when he smiled. Scars covered his arms from countless battles, and his black eyes held no mercy for the weak. He had been hunting and capturing refugees for 20 years, and this would be one of his largest prizes. "Boarding ships are ready, War Master," reported his second in command. "The refugees have no weapons and their shields are down. This will be easy work." Thakmor nodded with satisfaction. The Villani were a peaceful species, good for manual labor but poor fighters. Their children would be especially valuable as servants for the wealthy families back home. "Begin the boarding operation. Separate the families immediately. We do not want them organizing any resistance." All around the refugee ship, 12 Korthak cruisers moved into position like sharks circling wounded prey. Each ship was 3 times the size of any Villani vessel, armed with weapons that could crack planets. The Korthak Empire had conquered dozens of worlds with fleets like this one. Inside the Star Whisper, Captain Zexhai watched the enemy ships approach on his damaged sensors. His crew was trying to send out one last message when the communication officer suddenly looked up with surprise. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the Sol system," she said with wonder in her voice. "The humans are responding to our distress call." Zexhai felt a small spark of hope in his chest. Maybe the terrible stories about humans were wrong. Maybe they would help peaceful refugees escape from slavers. "What do they say?" The officer read the message twice before speaking. "It says help is coming. Hold on. That is all, sir." The captain looked at the enemy ships surrounding them and felt his brief hope fade away. Even if the humans wanted to help, They were too far away. The Korthak would have them all in chains long before any rescue could arrive. At least someone in the galaxy knows what happened to us, he said quietly. Maybe they will warn other refugee ships to avoid this area. Meanwhile, 6 light-years away, the human Third Assault Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. 8 ships materialized from the twisted space around them, their hulls dark and their weapons charged. They moved with the smooth precision of a hunting pack that had worked together for years. Commodore Dan Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the heavy cruiser Vengeance, studying the tactical display. His brown hair was cut short in military style, and his green eyes were cold as winter ice. He had spent 15 years fighting pirates and raiders across human space, but this was different. This time, children were in danger. "Sensor report," he ordered. 12 Korthak heavy cruisers surrounding a refugee vessel, replied his tactical officer. "They are beginning boarding operations, sir. We count at least 40 smaller ships moving between the cruisers and the refugee ship." Carter nodded grimly. The Korthak had brought enough ships to handle any normal rescue attempt. What they had not planned for was meeting humans who were not interested in rescue. They were interested in punishment. "Communications. Open a channel. To the Korthak fleet," Carter ordered. "All frequencies." The communication officer worked quickly at her station. "Channel open, sir. You are broadcasting to all enemy ships." Carter's voice was calm and steady as he spoke, but every human on the bridge could hear the anger beneath his words. "Korthak vessels. This is Commodore Carter of the human Third Assault Fleet. You will immediately cease your attack on the refugee ship and withdraw from this system. You have 30 seconds to comply." The response came quickly from the Korthak flagship. War Master Thakmore's voice was full of amusement and contempt. "Human vessel, you are outnumbered and outgunned. We count only 8 of your ships against our 12. Leave this system now or we will add your crews to our slave collection." Carter smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "War Master, you have made 2 mistakes. First, you threatened innocent people who asked us for help. Second, you just threatened us. You now have 15 seconds to surrender." Thakmore laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the communication channel. "Foolish Deathworlders, your reputation for violence is greatly exaggerated. We are Korthak warriors, conquerors of star systems. What can 8 ships do against our fleet? You are about to find out," Carter replied. Then he cut the communication and turned to his weapons officer. "All ships, weapons free. Target their engines first. I want prisoners for questioning." The battle began in the silence of space, but it was not the kind of fight the Korthak expected. Human ships moved like living things, dancing between enemy fire with impossible grace. Their weapons struck with pinpoint accuracy, crippling Korthak vessels before they could return fire effectively. Captain Roy Bennett commanded the destroyer Fierce Wind, the smallest ship in the human fleet, but also the fastest. He led his vessel through a gap between 2 Korthak cruisers, his guns tearing apart their weapon systems as he passed. His crew worked with practiced efficiency, each person knowing exactly what to do without needing orders. "Direct hit on the enemy flagship's main engines," reported his weapons officer. "Their power systems are failing." "Excellent," Bennett replied. "Prepare boarding parties. We need to get information about their slave operations before they can destroy their computer systems." Aboard the Korthak flagship, War Master Thakmore watched his fleet being torn apart with growing horror. Human ships seemed to ignore the laws of physics, turning and accelerating in ways that should have been impossible. Their weapons cut through Korthak armor like it was made of paper. "How are they moving so fast?" he demanded from his tactical officer. "Our ships are built for war. Theirs look like merchant vessels." "I do not know, War Master," the officer replied with panic in his voice. "They are using some kind of advanced technology we have never seen before. 3 of our cruisers are already disabled, and the humans have only been fighting for 5 minutes. Thakmore felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest: fear. These humans were not like the other species his empire had conquered. They fought with a cold efficiency that was terrifying to watch. Every shot hit its target. Every movement served a purpose, and they showed no mercy to slavers. "Send out a retreat signal," he ordered. "All ships are to withdraw immediately." But it was too late. The human fleet had surrounded the Korthak ships, cutting off all escape routes. Colonel Lisa Harper's special operations ship, the Retribution, appeared behind the enemy formation like a ghost materializing from the darkness. "Attention, Korthak fleet," came Carter's voice over the communication channel. "You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender immediately, or we will destroy every ship in your fleet. You have 60 seconds to decide." War Master Thakmor looked at his tactical display and saw the truth. His mighty fleet, the terror of a dozen star systems, was being destroyed by 8 human ships. The Deathworlders had not come to rescue the refugees. They had come to eliminate the threat completely. For the first time in his career as a slaver and conqueror, Thakmor understood what it felt like to be prey. The humans were not just better fighters than his warriors. They were something else, entirely, something that turned the darkness of space into a hunting ground where slavers became the hunted. The battle was far from over, but already the outcome was certain. The Korthak had made the mistake of threatening innocent people within range of humanity's protective instincts. Now they would learn why the galaxy whispered fearful stories about the species from the death world called Earth. The space around the refugee ship had become a graveyard of burning metal and twisted wreckage. What started as a Korthak hunting operation had turned into their worst nightmare. Human ships moved through the battle zone like deadly shadows, picking apart the enemy fleet with surgical precision. War Master Thakmor clutched the arms of his command chair as another explosion rocked his flagship. Half of his weapons were offline, his engines were failing, and 3 of his 12 cruisers were already floating dead in space. The humans had been fighting for only 15 minutes, but they were winning so completely that it looked like magic. "Damage. Report," he barked at his engineering officer. "Main power is down to 30%, War Master. Our primary weapons are destroyed, and we have hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. If we do not get help soon, we will lose life support within the hour." Thakmor could not understand what was happening. His fleet had conquered entire star systems. They had destroyed the armies of dozens of worlds. But these 8 human ships were tearing them apart like children playing with broken toys. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Commodore Dan Carter watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. His tactical display showed the Korthak fleet falling apart under the coordinated assault of his ships. But this was not just about winning a fight. This was about sending a message to every slaver in the galaxy. "Colonel Harper, status report." On the boarding operations, Carter spoke into his communication device. The voice of Colonel Lisa Harper came back clear and cold. "We have secured 4 enemy vessels, Commodore. My teams are downloading their computer systems now. The intelligence we are finding is worse than we expected." Harper commanded the Special Operations Ship Retribution, a vessel designed for the kind of close-quarters fighting that terrified other species. Her Marines were trained for situations exactly like this one, where innocent lives hung in the balance, and there was no room for mistakes. "What did you find, Colonel?" Carter asked. "Slave routes, sir. Dozens of them. The Korthak have been running organized hunting operations across this entire sector of space. They have prison camps on 15 different worlds, holding millions of people from at least 30 species." Carter felt his anger grow even colder. This was not just a random attack on refugees. The Korthak were running an industrial slavery operation, treating intelligent beings like cattle to be bought, and let us continue the intelligence gathering, Colonel. We need to know the location of every camp and every slave route. Aboard the refugee ship Star Whisper, Captain HFY watched the battle through his damaged sensors with amazement and growing horror. The humans were not just defeating the Korthak fleet, they were destroying it completely, making sure that no enemy ship would escape to threaten other innocent people. "Captain, the human commander is requesting communication with us," reported his communications officer. "Put him through," HFY replied quickly. Commodore Carter's image appeared on the main screen. He looked calm and professional, but the Volani captain could see the controlled fury in his eyes. "Captain HFY, I am Commodore Carter of the human fleet. Are your people safe?" "Yes, sir. The Korthak had begun boarding operations, but your arrival stopped them before they could take anyone. We have wounded but no casualties yet." "Good. Stay exactly where you are and keep your people away from the outer hull sections. We still have work to finish here. The communication ended, and Zexhai turned to his crew. You heard the human, Commander. Keep everyone in the inner sections of the ship. I think this battle is far from over. He was right. Captain Roy Bennett was leading his destroyer Fierce Wind toward one of the remaining Korthak cruisers. But this was not a normal ship-to-ship engagement. The humans had developed new tactics specifically for fighting slavers, methods that were both effective and terrifying. Sergeant Amy Price, prepare your boarding team, Bennett ordered. We are going in hard and fast, remember. Our job is to gather intelligence and make sure no Korthak escapes to warn their empire. Price was a career Marine who had spent 10 years fighting in the worst conflicts across human space. She was small and quiet, but her soldiers would follow her into any battle because they knew she would bring them home alive. Teams are ready. Sir, we go in 30 seconds. The Fierce Wind attached itself to the enemy cruiser like a parasite, cutting through the Korthak hull with advanced plasma torches. Price led her Marines through the breach in a coordinated assault that moved like clockwork. They had practiced this operation hundreds of times, but never with stakes this high. The Korthak warriors waiting inside their ship were tough and experienced fighters, but they had never faced human Marines in close combat. Price and her team moved through the enemy corridors with deadly efficiency, using weapons and tactics that seemed impossible to the alien soldiers. Clear the command center, Price ordered through her communication device. We need those computer systems intact. Her Marines worked in perfect coordination, each person covering the others as they advanced through the ship. The Korthak tried to fight back, but they were facing soldiers who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of operation. Meanwhile, War Master Thakmor was trying desperately to organize a retreat with his surviving ships. But every time he gave an order, another human vessel appeared to block his escape route. It was like fighting ghosts that could read his mind and predict his every move. All remaining ships follow my lead, he broadcast on the emergency frequency. We will break through their line and escape to hyperspace. The 4 surviving Korthak cruisers turned toward what looked like a gap in the human formation, their engines straining to reach escape velocity. But Commander Steve Walsh was waiting for them with his squadron of human fighters. Walsh was a pilot who had learned to fly in the asteroid fields around Earth's moon, dodging rocks and debris at speeds that would kill most other species. Leading a squadron against fleeing slavers was almost too easy for someone with his skills. Phoenix Squadron, this is Commander Walsh. Target their hyperspace drives. Do not let any of them escape. His fighters swept through the Korthak formation like hunting birds, their weapons striking with pinpoint accuracy. Each pilot was a specialist who could thread their ship through gaps that looked impossibly small, hitting targets that other species would consider unreachable. Within minutes, the last Korthak ships were dead in space, their escape systems destroyed and their crews trapped. Thakmor realized that his career as a slaver was over. More than that, his entire way of life was finished. Colonel Harper's voice came over the communication network, reporting to Commodore Carter. Sir, we have completed our intelligence gathering. The scope of the Korthak slavery operation is massive. They have been capturing and selling people for over 50 years. Carter's response was cold and final. Colonel, prepare a complete report for Fleet Command. Include everything we found about their prison camps and slave routes. This ends today. As the last Korthak weapons fell silent, Captain Zexhai understood something that would change how his people saw the universe. When the distress call reached the Deathworlders, they had not sent a rescue mission. They had sent judgment itself, swift and terrible and final. The humans had not just saved 12,000 refugees. They had declared war on slavery itself, and they had the ships and soldiers to make that declaration stick. The galaxy was about to learn that some lines should never be crossed, especially when the species enforcing those lines came from a world that had forged them in fire and death. The Korthak Empire's days of hunting innocent people were numbered. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the war room deep beneath Earth's surface, staring at the massive display screen that showed the intelligence gathered from the destroyed Korthak fleet. The data was worse than anyone had imagined. Red dots marked 15 different star systems where millions of people were held in slavery camps. Yellow lines showed the routes used to transport captured beings across half the galaxy. How long have they been doing this? She asked Colonel Ryan Phillips, who had been studying the reports all night. At least 50 years, Admiral. Maybe longer. They have turned slavery into a business, with organized hunting fleets, processing centers, and distribution networks. The scope is staggering. Sullivan felt a cold anger settle in her chest. She had spent 30 years protecting human space from pirates and raiders, but this was something far worse. The Korthak had built an empire on the suffering of innocent people, and they had been doing it while the rest of the galaxy looked the other way. "Get me the Defense Council," she ordered. "Emergency session. Full authority protocols." Within 2 hours, the 12 most powerful people in human government were gathered around the secure conference table. President Maria Santos looked tired, but alert as Admiral Sullivan presented the evidence. Defense Secretary Robert Kim reviewed the data files with growing horror. General Chris Hamilton, commander of all ground forces, studied the prison camp locations with the eye of a professional. "Soldier, the question before us is simple," President Santos said after reviewing the intelligence. "Do we treat this as a rescue operation for the people in those camps, or do we treat it as a war against the Korthak Empire?" "Madam President, with respect, those are the same thing," replied General Hamilton. "You cannot rescue millions of slaves without destroying the system that enslaves them. The Korthak Empire must be dismantled completely." Defense Secretary Kim nodded in agreement. "The intelligence shows that slavery is not just part of their economy, it is their economy. Every major Korthak world depends on slave labor. They will fight to the death to protect their way of life." Admiral Sullivan activated the holographic display that showed the full scope of Korthak space. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are looking at a coordinated military operation across 17 star systems. This will require the largest deployment in human history." The room was quiet for several minutes as the council members absorbed the implications. They were talking about going to war with an entire civilization, not just defeating a single fleet or capturing a few planets. The Korthak Empire controlled hundreds of worlds and commanded millions of soldiers. "What are our chances of success?" asked President Santos. General Hamilton smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Madam President, we are not going to fight the Korthak Empire. We are going to end it. When this operation is complete, slavery will no longer exist in this sector of the galaxy." The vote was unanimous. Within hours, orders were flowing to every human military base, shipyard, and training facility. Operation Liberator was officially authorized, with General Hamilton in overall command, and Admiral Sullivan coordinating naval operations. Meanwhile, aboard the refugee ship, Star Whisper, Captain HFY was trying to understand what his distress call had started. Commodore Carter had remained in the system to coordinate the cleanup of the destroyed Korthak fleet and to interview the surviving enemy prisoners. "Captain, the human commander wishes to speak with you again," reported his communications officer. Carter appeared on the main screen, looking as calm and professional as before. But HFY could see something different in his eyes now, a cold determination that had not been there during the battle. "Captain HFY, I wanted to inform you that your distress call has had consequences far beyond what you might have expected," Carter said. "The intelligence we gathered from the Korthak fleet has revealed the scope of their slavery operations. My government has decided to take action." "What kind of action, Commodore?" HFY asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "We are going to shut down every slave camp, destroy every prison facility, and eliminate every slaver fleet in Korthak space. The empire that attacked your people will cease to exist." HFY felt his breath catch in his throat. "You are talking about a war that could last for years and cost millions of lives." Carter's expression did not change. "Captain, my species has a saying. When you choose to profit from the suffering of innocent people, you forfeit your right to exist peacefully in the same galaxy. The Korthak made their choice 50 years ago. Now they will face the consequences." The communication ended, leaving HFY staring at a blank screen. He turned to his crew and saw the same mix of amazement and fear on their faces. They had called for help to save 12,000 refugees, and the humans were responding by declaring war on an entire empire. Back on Earth, the massive machinery of human military production was shifting into high gear. Shipyards that normally built cargo vessels and passenger ships were retooling to produce warships. Training facilities were expanded to handle the flood of new recruits. Weapons factories worked around the clock to supply the growing fleet. Dr. Helen Ross, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, was brought in to brief the military commanders on what they could expect from the Korthak. She stood before a room full of generals and admirals, explaining the mindset of a species that had built its entire civilization on slavery. The Korthak see other intelligent species as resources to be harvested, she explained. They do not understand concepts like mercy or negotiation when it comes to their slaves. This makes them dangerous opponents, but it also makes them predictable. General Hamilton leaned forward in his chair. What do you mean, predictable? They will use their slaves as human shields, thinking that we will hesitate to fight if innocent lives are at risk. They do not understand that humans become more dangerous when we are fighting to protect others, not less dangerous. Admiral Sullivan nodded grimly. Our special forces have been training for exactly these scenarios. We can extract hostages while eliminating their captors simultaneously. Dr. Ross continued her briefing. The Korthak leadership will try to negotiate. Once they realize they are losing, they will offer tribute, territory, even some of their own people as slaves. You need to understand that this is how they think. To them, slavery is not a moral issue. It is simply business. They will learn. Otherwise, General Hamilton said quietly, when Operation Liberator begins, every slave camp will be hit simultaneously. We will not give them time to organize a defense or move their prisoners. Colonel Lisa Harper had returned to Earth to brief the special operations teams that would lead the assault on the prison facilities. She stood before 300 of the most elite soldiers in human space, explaining what they would face on the slave worlds. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going into facilities that have been designed to hold millions of people against their will. The conditions are worse than anything you have seen in training. Some of the prisoners have been there for decades. Many of them will not trust us at first because they have learned that rescue is just another form of cruelty. She activated a display showing the layout of a typical Korthak prison complex. Our job is to get them out alive and make sure no guard escapes to harm them in revenge. We go in fast, we secure the facilities completely, and we treat every prisoner like they are our own family members. Sergeant Amy Price raised her hand. Colonel, what are our rules of engagement regarding Korthak civilians? Harper's expression was ice cold. Sergeant, there are no Korthak civilians. Their entire society is built on slavery. Every adult Korthak has profited from the suffering of innocent people. We will not target non-combatants, but we will not pretend that this is a conflict between armies. This is a war between two ways of life, and only one of them can survive. As the briefings continued and the fleets assembled, word of the coming operation spread through the galaxy. Some species celebrated, knowing that the threat to their own refugees and traders would soon be eliminated. Others worried about what would happen if the humans turned their attention to other empires with questionable practices. The peaceful Altarians sent a message of support, offering to help care for the freed slaves. The militaristic hegemony quietly began reviewing their own policies regarding prisoner treatment. The merchant guilds started calculating how much money they could make rebuilding the worlds that would soon be liberated. But in the prison camps, scattered across Korthak space, millions of enslaved beings continued their daily struggle for survival, unaware that help was coming. They did not know that a single distress call from a refugee ship had triggered the largest military operation in human history. They did not know that their suffering had finally reached a species that would go to war to end it. The Korthak Empire had ruled through fear and cruelty for generations. They were about to learn that some species do not fear bullies. Some species hunt them. The morning of Operation Liberator began with silence across 17 star systems. In prison camps and slave facilities throughout Korthak space, millions of captives woke to another day of suffering, unaware that freedom was racing toward them at the speed of light. At exactly 0800 Earth Standard Time, 50 human battle fleets dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously. The largest military operation in galactic history had begun. General Chris Hamilton stood in the command center, on Earth, watching as reports flooded in from across the operational zone. Green lights appeared on his tactical display as each fleet reached their assigned targets. In less than 60 seconds, human forces had surrounded every major Korthak military installation and slave facility in known space. All fleets report. Ready status, sir, announced his communications officer. Operation Liberator is go for execution. Hamilton opened a channel that reached every human ship and every Korthak receiver in the targeted systems. His voice was calm and steady, but every word carried the weight of absolute authority. Attention all Korthak forces. This is General Hamilton of the Human Defense Forces. You are surrounded and outgunned. Release all prisoners immediately and surrender, or face complete destruction. You have 10 minutes to comply. On the Korthak homeworld, Emperor Vashatuk stared at his communication screen in disbelief. The human fleets had appeared without warning, bypassing his outer defenses as if they did not exist. His advisors ran around the throne room in panic, shouting contradictory orders and demanding explanations that no one could provide. How many ships do they have? The Emperor demanded from his fleet commander. Over 400 vessels, Your Majesty. They have brought enough firepower to sterilize entire planets. This is not a rescue mission. This is an invasion. Vashatuk had ruled the Korthak Empire for 30 years, building his power on the backs of enslaved millions. He understood military force and political pressure, but he had never faced anything like this before. The humans were not trying to conquer his empire. They were trying to erase it completely. Open a channel to their commander, he ordered. I will negotiate with these Deathworlders. Meanwhile, Captain Neil Turner was leading the assault on the primary slave processing facility orbiting the Korthak homeworld. His heavy cruiser Righteousness moved through the enemy defensive fire like it was a gentle rain, his shields absorbing impacts that would have crippled other ships. Captain, we are receiving surrender requests from multiple Korthak facilities, reported his communications officer. They want to negotiate terms. Turner's response was ice cold. Tell them there are no terms. Release the prisoners or be destroyed. Those are their only options. Below him on the moon's surface, Commander Beth Collins was coordinating the ground. Assault on the largest prison complex in Korthak space. Over 2 million beings from 30 different species were held in the facility, some for decades. Her Marines had trained for months to handle the liberation of such a massive installation. Blue Team, secure the guard towers. Red Team, move on the administrative complex. Green Team, begin opening the cell blocks. Remember, many of these prisoners will be terrified of us. Move slowly and keep your weapons lowered unless you encounter resistance. The Korthak guards had expected their usual victims to cower before them, but they found themselves facing human soldiers who moved like ghosts and fought like demons. Collins led her team through the facility with surgical precision, eliminating guards while keeping the prisoners safe. In one of the cell blocks, a group of Volani refugees who had been captured months earlier huddled together as the sounds of battle echoed through the corridors. They had given up hope of rescue long ago, learning that the galaxy was a cold place where the strong preyed upon the weak without consequence. The cell door opened, and a human soldier appeared. She was small and quiet, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. Sergeant Amy Price looked at the frightened prisoners and spoke in their own language, words she had learned specifically for this mission. My name is Amy Price. I am a soldier from Earth. You are safe now. We have come to take you home. The oldest Volani prisoner, a female who had spent 5 years in captivity, looked at the human with disbelief. You came for us? But we are nobody. We have no money to pay for rescue. Price knelt down to the prisoner's level, her eyes gentle but determined. Ma'am, you do not need money to deserve freedom. You just need to be alive. That is enough for us. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds. Human soldiers were breaking down the doors of prison camps, fighting through enemy defenses and carrying out the largest rescue operation in recorded history. Each team had trained for this moment, preparing to face the horrors they would find. in the slave facilities. On his flagship above the Korthak homeworld, Emperor Vashitak finally managed to establish communication with the human forces. General Hamilton's image appeared on his screen, and the Emperor was struck by how ordinary the human looked. This was not some terrible monster from the stories. This was just a middle-aged man with gray hair and tired eyes. General Hamilton, I am Emperor Vashitak. I believe we can reach an understanding. The Korthak Empire is willing to discuss terms for ending this conflict. Hamilton's response was quiet but final. Your Majesty, you seem to misunderstand the situation. This is not a negotiation. This is justice. Your empire has profited from slavery for over 50 years. That ends today. But surely we can reach some arrangement, the Emperor said desperately. We can offer tribute, territory, even some of our own people as compensation for your losses. The look in Hamilton's eyes became something that made the Emperor step backward from his screen. Your Majesty, you just offered to sell your own people as slaves to save yourself. That tells me everything I need to know about you and your empire. Communication ended, and Hamilton turned to his fleet commanders. All ships commence final operations. I want every slave facility destroyed and every prisoner freed within the next 6 hours. The battle for the Korthak homeworld lasted less than 3 hours. The Emperor's palace guard, elite warriors who had terrorized civilians for generations, found themselves facing soldiers who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of fight. The outcome was never in doubt. When it was over, Emperor Vashitak sat in chains in the same cell where he had once kept political prisoners. Around him, the infrastructure of slavery was being systematically dismantled by human engineers, who worked with the same methodical precision their soldiers had shown in battle. Captain Zexhai stood on the bridge of the Star Whisper, now safely, docked at a human station where his people were receiving medical care and preparing for the journey home. He watched the news reports coming in from across former Korthak space and tried to understand what his single distress call had accomplished. 43 million beings had been freed from slavery. Hundreds of worlds were being liberated. An entire empire built on cruelty had been erased from the galaxy in less than a week. The humans had not just answered his call for help. They had answered every call for help that had never been sent, every prayer that had never been heard, every hope that had been abandoned in the darkness of a slave camp. Admiral Kate Sullivan appeared on his communication screen, looking tired but satisfied. Captain Zexhai, I wanted to personally thank you for sending that distress call. Because of your courage, millions of people are going home to their families. Admiral, I called for help to save 12,000 refugees. I never imagined it would lead to something like this. Sullivan smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, the expression was warm instead of coldly professional. Captain, when someone asks us for help, we do not measure our response by the size of the request. We measure it by the size of the need. Your people needed rescue, but 43 million others needed liberation. We could not do one without doing the other. As the reports continued to flow in, the galaxy began to understand what had happened. The humans had not just defeated the Korthak Empire. They had announced to every species that slavery would no longer be tolerated. Any civilization that profited from the suffering of innocent people would face the same fate as the Korthak. Some species worried about what this meant for their own internal policies. Others celebrated, knowing that their traders and refugees would be safer in a galaxy where the Deathworlders hunted slavers. The peaceful races sent messages of gratitude, while the predatory ones began to reconsider their business models. But, in the former slave camps, now conversion centers where freed beings prepared to return home or find new lives, the impact was simpler and more profound. Millions of people who had lost hope were learning to dream again. Children who had known only chains were playing in sunlight for the first time in years. The distress call had reached Deathworlders, and they had not sent help. They had sent war, swift and terrible and final. In doing so, they had proven that in a galaxy full of predators and prey, there was still one species willing to hunt the hunters when innocent lives were at stake. The Korthak Empire was gone, but its destruction had sent a message that would echo through the stars for generations. Earth had chosen its side in the eternal struggle between the strong and the weak, and they,